All right, I'm going to get started. My name is Alina Grabowski. I'm the ASB program chair this year. I'm really excited to have all of you come to this exceptional keynote by Cara Wall-Scheffler. And I'm actually going to sign up and have Ryan Alcantara introduce her. Ryan was a previous student of hers. And so as we all kind of filter in, I want you to direct your attention to Ryan, who's going to introduce Cara. All right, thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you very much, Alina. It is my pleasure to introduce Cara Wall-Scheffler as today's keynote speaker. Cara is a full professor of biology at Seattle Pacific University, where her research focuses on the sexual dimorphism of human locomotion and thermoregulation. And as Alina mentioned, Cara was my undergraduate mentor and responsible for introducing me to the wonderful world of biomechanics and physiology research. Cara has repeatedly been recognized as Professor of the Year at SPU, and in addition to an extensive list of awards, grants, and manuscripts, she's recently published a book on the evolutionary biology of the human pelvis. If you were at the 2019 ISB/ASB Symposium on Human Energetics or Locomotion, or if you've tuned in to Cara's interview with the internationally recognized Boom podcast, you'll know that today's talk will be as engaging as it is informative. Let's welcome Cara Wall-Scheffler.
All right. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ryan, for my introduction, Dr. Alcantara. And thank you very much, Alina, for inviting me to speak today. I'm already sharing my screen, so you should be able to take a look at my title. I'm a big believer in putting my cards on the table right away. So you will see that I'm going to be talking about endurance running, the endurance running hypothesis today, and why I think that the traits that we talk about as mattering for running really matter for walking with loads. I have put my contact information here on this first slide if you want to grab that. I really hope that we're able to continue some of these conversations into the future. I have practiced my talk, but it's possible that I'll run a little bit towards the end. It sounds like I'll be able to take questions in a chat room, which we'll talk about at the end, but please feel free to email me anytime with questions or ideas. If you want slides or papers or reprints, please just let me know. I think the reason I'm an academic is to talk about ideas. And so I'm really excited to talk about some of these with you and to hear your ideas as well. So just to start, I want to take a second to mention why I think my perspective as an evolutionary anthropologist matters for the study of biomechanics. I think when we approach biomechanics from a functional perspective, we really are interested in optimizing performance. And so if we're looking at Allyson Felix and her speed, her gait, her kick, jumping off the blocks, we have a specific perspective in mind, trying to figure out how to help her be the best athlete that she can. When I'm looking at her from an evolutionary perspective, I'm really interested in what allows her gait, her functional biomechanics, particularly her energetics. I'm interested in how that helps her be a great reproducer, because reproduction is how we survive as a species. And that is one of my main questions of interest as an anthropologist. So I'm interested in an idea of evolutionary fitness. How does doing something well, locomoting well, how does that allow us to acquire food, water, other resources, and mates, and successfully reproduce? And I'm really interested when we're talking about something that might affect all people, I'm really interested in whether or not it actually does affect all people. And so I'm looking at this really small group of ideas called human universals. What type of locomotion, what patterns of locomotion, what body characteristics do we see across human populations across time? So I'm going to start today by talking about a hypothesis that's become very prevalent in literature, which has to do with a series of characteristics a series of characteristics of our bodies that we think emerge with the genus Homo that are purported to matter for a strategy called persistence hunting. In this strategy, the idea is that humans have gained access to particularly food by running to exhaustion ungulates and then killing those ungulates and using those resources for food. This hypothesis was first put forth in 1984 by Dave Carrier at University of Utah. And he set out a really elegant hypothesis about the importance of bipedalism and thermoregulation in actually all bipeds for all of our lineage, beginning with Australopithecines. And he suggested that because we're biped and we don't have respiratory constraint on hitting the ground, therefore we should be able to run down ungulates with greater efficiency. And therefore, a series of other things about our anatomy might matter for running. This hypothesis was picked up again by Carrier's mentor, Bramble, and a colleague, Dan Lieberman, in 2004. And it was on the cover of Nature. Many of you, I'm sure, have read this article. It has a little table in it that lists a series of characteristics that Bramble and Lieberman purport really only allow humans to be successful because of running. And in this, they specifically focus on the genus Homo, where Carrier again had focused on all bipeds. So now Bramble and Lieberman are locating this idea of persistence hunting, running down ungulates based on a series of morphological characteristics that they say emerge later in hominin evolution. And then in 2009, this book was published, Born to Run. I get this book a lot for Christmas for some reason, so I have numerous copies of it actually. And in this particular book, this Born to Run idea became very exciting, even though in the book, we're really talking about a specific human population with a really specific niche. However, the Born to Run idea was sort of taken on by a series of papers leading off of the 2004. And now we have ourselves a paradigm that a suite of human morphological variation comes from persistence hunting. So there are really two parts to this story then. The first part has to be localized in the idea that running is a consequence of a selection pressure to gain access to meat. And so we have to think about running in terms of selection pressures in order for this paradigm to work. Additionally, morphological and physiological aspects of Homo sapiens have evolved to support endurance running. We have to be able to say that the morphological characteristics really matter for running, the physiological characteristics really matter for running, and not for any other of the many things that humans do. So we need to approach this problem in these two ways. Carrier's original paper that's then copied in the Bramble and Lieberman paper used this graph to explain the selection pressure for persistence hunting on human running. So here on the x-axis, we have speed. On the y-axis, we have mass-specific cost of transport. These dotted lines are the cost of transport curve for Hoyt and Taylor's pony study. So the ponies at different gaits are running, they have a curvilinear cost of transport. And here in solid lines is the cost of transport curve for human walking. And then here, this straight line is the cost of transport line purported to be for human running. So Carrier's initial idea that was taken up by Bramble and Lieberman is that if there is no relationship in humans between speed and the cost of transport, then that would mean that humans can choose any speed in order to run down the ungulate in order to kill it. So they're going to run down the ungulate at the ungulate's not good speed in order to push the ungulate to dehydration and death more rapidly. So the selection pressure of endurance running to gain access to meat is dependent upon having no relationship between speed and the cost of transport, choosing the least optimal speed for the ungulate, which of course shouldn't cost us anything more than running at a different speed. So the question then became, when and how did this speed independence occur? And there are a number of hypotheses Carrier put forth for why we might have this speed independence. It could just be because we're bipedal and we're freed from that respiratory constraint of squeezing our lungs together, which quadrupeds have. It could be that becoming large of large body size is really important, because then our efficiency should drop down to be slightly closer to the efficiency of the quadrupeds. And so we probably need to get slightly larger. And then we, of course, have to lose our hair, our fur from primate ancestry, and upregulate our acquisition and then use of sweat glands. So we thermoregulate the ungulates because we don't rely on panting. So these characteristics are purported to go along with persistence hunting, and potentially we need persistence hunting to explain why humans have these characteristics. So what questions should emerge then in order to test the endurance running hypothesis as explaining human morphology and physiology? Do bipedalism, large body size, and naked sweating seem to emerge or even sort together in the hominin, the bipedal lineage? Do humans actually have speed independence during running? Do the benefits of running outweigh the significant costs in terms of food and water resources? Do humans today really run that much? Is it a human universal? And then is there some other selection pressure that might explain all of these characteristics that we're interested in just as well? So do bipedalism, body size, and naked sweating emerge together? So here what you're looking at is a sampling of the human fossil record, the hominin fossil record. Your y-axis is years ago in millions. So this is 7 million years ago, and this is the present. And here is a variety of hominins that have existed over time, for which we have some extent of fossil record for. And so we would say all of these creatures are bipedal. The majority of these creatures, if you watch my cursor, this entire subgroup here, all lived in Africa. And then we are merged out of Africa in this subgroup over here. And we're going to talk a little bit about whether or not body size and naked sweating and how they appear among this pretty substantial group of organisms. Again, Carrier's hypothesis would be that running comes with bipedalism. So all of these creatures could have run. Bramble and Lieberman's hypothesis is that running emerges particularly with Homo erectus. So that would be this creature and later hominins there. First of all, with bipedalism, we immediately do have thermoregulatory advantages. So there's no question that humans are excellent thermoregulators, even without the naked, even without the sweating, simply because of our posture. And in this sort of seminal 1984 paper, these dotted circles represent the solar radiation of a biped, pictured here. And these open circles represent the solar radiation of a quadruped as the sun rises and sets essentially at the equator where our lineage emerges. So just by becoming a biped, it's true that this entire colored region is the thermoregulatory savings of having the sun hit you more like this rather than having the sun hit you like this. So becoming a biped does in effect make you a better thermoregulator without anything else happening. In terms of body size, we don't get that larger body size right away. And in fact, body size is one of the most complicated features of emerging hominins. So this on the x-axis, we are essentially looking at cross sections of fossils over time, and on the y-axis, we're looking at their stature. So here's an example of Australopithecus afarensis. Many of you would know this as Lucy. And so Lucy again she's bipedal, but she has a very small body size. So we don't have that running efficiency with the emergence of bipedality. They don't come together. Here are Homo erectus, and Homo erectus does not immediately show a large body size. We have a massive diversity of body size with creatures that we would call Homo erectus. And so we really don't see body size and large body size until quite a bit later. And then again, as many of you know from looking around you, Homo sapiens show a massive variation in stature and mass. And so suggesting that it's a universal is in and of itself problematic. But if we stay in this land, Homo erectus, even from the beginning, Homo erectus does not immediately show a large body size. Additionally, the selection pressure of running requires out thermoregulating ungulates, which requires a hot environment. This pale blue color, I'm just going to run my cursor over it because I know the pale blue can show up slightly differently on people's screens. The pale blue represents the entire range of fossils relating to Homo erectus. And actually, one of the things that's most important about Homo erectus is that Homo erectus moves into colder and highly seasonal environments, not sort of warm, hot places where you're always going to find yourself able to out thermoregulate an ungulate, at least not with heat exhaustion. And so again, based on morphology, based on location of where we find Homo erectus, the large body size and the ability to out thermoregulate doesn't seem to emerge together. So this figure, again, we have this is the x-axis. We have 7 million years ago to present. We have bipedalism emerge at 7 million years ago. I'm not going to get to go into too much detail today, but suffice it to say, when bipedalism emerges, it's in the trees, and we don't get terrestrial bipedalism until about right here. So here we have terrestrial bipedalism emerge just over 4 million years ago. And as I said, you get some thermoregulatory advantages immediately. You get slightly larger body size emerging at about 1.9 million years ago, but not everybody gets it. It's scattered throughout different creatures. And then information on sweating tends to come from genetic studies. So we don't have a sort of a fossil record of the hair. And so genetic studies on skin pigmentation suggest about 1 million years ago for the loss of hair and the development of melanin protections on our skin. And so we probably have nakedness and sweating emerge at about 1 million years ago. So they're not really coming at the same time, and they're not really coming necessarily even in the same niche. So do bipedalism, size, and naked sweating seem to emerge or even sort together? They definitely do not emerge as a package, absolutely not. They emerge instead as a mosaic. Do humans actually have speed independence during running? Again, remembering that the way that the selection pressure works is that humans can choose their running speed, not incur any additional energetic cost, and run an ungulate to exhaustion. So many years ago, we didn't even think that quadrupeds had an optimal running speed. And it took a very special, carefully designed study by Hoyt and Taylor to push the ponies to really slow speeds within a gait, really fast speeds within a gait, in order to detect these increased costs at the extremes of a gait, which then create our curvilinear cost of transport curves for walking, trotting, and galloping. So when I set out to test the the lack of relationship between speed and cost of transport, I had to figure out how I was going to get humans to run at a variety of different speeds. And so I decided to do the study on the treadmill. I'm going to just spill the beans, but it's really hard to get people to run away from their optimum, not on a treadmill, free running. I've tried it for years, and I'm happy to chat more with people about why it's hard to get people to run away from their optimum in the field. But suffice it to say, I used indirect calorimetry, and I measured breath by breath aerobic respiration on humans running on a treadmill from 2 meters per second to 4 or 4.5 meters per second. And it was really important that it was aerobic respiration, which is another reason why I generally suggest you need very fit people in order to test the optimal running speed. I published my first paper on the optimal running speed in 2009 with my postdoc mentor, Karen Streudel-Numbers. The open circles are males, the closed circles are females, and we went ahead and showed that humans do in fact have an optimal running speed. There is, as with our own walking gait, and as with other quadrupeds moving between gaits, there is a curvilinear relationship between speed and cost of transport. I replicated this in 2012 with one of my students, Michael Wilcoxon. We were testing whether or not Carrier's hypothesis about controlling breath and breathing patterns might explain what's happening at the human optimum. Carrier again had suggested that being bipedal freed up our breathing to breathe in any pattern that we liked. And we definitely found that that was true. There was no correlation between breathing pattern and what was happening at the optimum. And pretty much people breathed however they felt like it across their different speeds. And then in 2017, with another student, Joseph Rathke, we were able to show that in a lab situation, people choose their optimum speed out of any speed that they wanted. So we measured optimal running curves for runners. We had them come in and then choose their preferential speed, and people significantly were more likely to choose their optimum running speed. Currently, I've been working with a team led by Jess Sellinger and Scott Delp, looking at people running in the wild. And so the orange and the teal are the compilation of all of my different lab-based data for females and males and optimum running curves. And we have found that people freely running outside do significantly choose to run at their optimal running speed. And this is currently submitted for publication. So here are our cost of transport curves for ponies, and here are our cost of transport curves for humans. We'll come back to this, I think, at the end of the lecture today, and potentially if you all have questions. Something to take note of for the moment, this is the last time I'm going to have these two graphs up, is that essentially speed and cost of transport in the ponies is flat. You have blips when you transfer between gaits, but the cost of trotting is about the same as the cost of walking at the optimum. In humans, the cost of running is twice as expensive as walking, even at your optimum. So running in humans is a particularly costly endeavor, and this is going to matter as we sort of look forward as to what might be going on. So, do the benefits of running down prey outweigh the significant costs in terms of food and water resources? So a pursuit, an optimal pursuit, sort of the length of time it takes you to run down prey, is 72% of your daily energy expenditure. So substantial. The argument, of course, is you get lots of energy back from that daily, from that pursuit. However, you have to share that with everybody in your group because everybody in your group didn't go out. Only a couple people went out on the hunt. So you have to share it with everybody. And honestly, not all of it is tasty. If you have run an ungulate to exhaustion, its skeletal muscle is rubbish. It is flooded with adrenaline and other hormones, and it is not going to be tasty. You can still get the fatty organs and other potential nutrients from the ungulate, but it's not going to be a steak at a nice restaurant, okay? It's going to be skeletal muscle under duress. There is, of course, an optimal speed mismatch. We actually have about the same optimal speeds with ungulates, particularly of the same size. And so to run them down, to choose a speed that is their not optimum is also choosing a speed that's not our optimum either. And this pushes you towards 84% of your daily energy expenditure. Additionally, outrunning requires out thermoregulating, and our thermoregulation requires water. So in the reported endurance hunts, generally people are given water. Otherwise, you have to carry it yourself, which comes with a load cost. So the final question, of course, is do humans do this habitually? There have been two primary studies looking on this, but in addition to Born to Run. And Liebenberg in 2006, and then Pickering and Benn in 2007. This study is on, Liebenberg's study is on the indigenous people of the Kalahari, and Pickering and Benn's study is on the indigenous people of the Serengeti. So we have two equatorial groups of people. Pickering and Benn purport that their population never runs, never. The only time in decades of field research they've ever seen them run is when they are trying to get shelter from the rain. And from Seattle, I totally sympathize with this predicament. So no running. Liebenberg, his original studies on pursuit hunting is one of the places that the endurance running hypothesis came from. If you read his original paper, this is what happens. After a full moon, at the start of the rainy season, 2 to 4 people go on a pursuit. This happens once or twice a year because the conditions in order to run the ungulate down are so severe that it can only happen once or twice. So 2 to 4 humans, once or twice a year, does not make a selection pressure out of the 8 billion people, even if you're going to harken back to when we were only about 100,000 people. So we are not regular runners cross-culturally. Now, I want to take this moment to say, it is okay to love something we didn't evolve to do. I go running every day. I love it. I also love canoeing, kayaking, fencing, and being in the water, none of which I think we really evolved to do. And I enjoyed watching the Olympics and seeing humans do amazing things that we didn't evolve to do. And that's why culture is so fantastic, because we can use our bodies in these interesting and new ways. So it's okay to love running and study running and be excited about running, even though we didn't evolve to do it. What we did evolve to do is to walk around carrying enormous loads. And this is a human universal, of which again, there are like 3. So I take them really seriously. Humans everywhere in the world commute with walking and with carrying all sorts of items. So let's look back at our 2 things. Selection pressure for gaining access to meat, not so much. It's unusual and not every population does it. Selection pressure for reproducing, foraging, and alloparenting, every human population does this every day, everybody in the group, children, women, men, everybody. So this is also a selection pressure that acts on all humans at all time, in all places. So the morphological and physiological aspects of Homo sapiens have evolved to support endurance load carrying. Here's simply an example of another person who is pregnant, carrying a kid, carrying a backpack, carrying a side satchel, carrying tools, walking. Really typical. The archaeological evidence additionally supports this idea. When we first see the emergence of behaviorally modern humans, we see the emergence of a certain special type of point, and we also see long distance transport of heavy raw materials. So even if you're not convinced by having to reproduce in order to not be dead, then you could be convinced by the idea that we are carrying large amounts of heavy rock, hundreds of kilometers, in order to use them for their specific chemical qualities and make tools and then share those tools. So we know long distance transport of goods is something that emerges with our species. So what do we get? What do we get with human bipedalism that is consistent with load carrying? We have lumbar curvature. We have, it has been shown, Catherine Whitcomb and colleagues in 2007 showed that our lumbar curvature allows us to locate our center of mass over our limbs when we're carrying particularly frontal loads. So we have our lumbar curvature in order to carry well. We have short, broad ilia and relationship additionally with our acetabulae and our greater trochanter, and having this style of pelvis and pelvic femoral relationship allows us to carry loads for a very low cost. We have large femoral heads, large acetabulum indicative of our large body size. We also have long lower limbs in comparison with our torso and arm length. These large body size, in addition to our body proportions, allow us to carry 15% of our body mass as a load for less of an energetic cost than Australopithecines walking alone. So our body size, in addition to our proportions, make us extremely effective load carriers. Additionally, a lot has been made of our small toes, our light feet, and the stiffness of our arch. This has been shown to reduce the energetic burden of walking, of course, in terms of having light distal segments. And then, of course, having stiff feet has been shown to reduce the energetic cost of load carrying. Physiologically, endurance load carrying matters as well. There has been quite a bit of chatter about runner's high and the importance of endorphin release being indicative of a selection pressure for running, but we could call this the hiker's high, or the being with friends high, or the carrying a little load for an hour high, because almost everything we do for at least an hour causes the release of endorphins. I don't even have citations on this slide because it's textbook. Every textbook that you read about neurobiology and endorphins talks about moderate exercise. Numerous studies have shown that endorphin release follows exercise with friends to a greater proportion than exercise alone. There are so many ways our body makes us feel good about doing things that are a little bit hard, doing things that are important for sociality and maintaining social relationships. We don't need any specific additional super hard thing in order to explain the tremendous amount of endorphin released for just walking up a hill for 45 minutes. Thermoregulation also comes with load carrying. Again, we don't need running in order to know that sweating is important for our bodies. I have students walking up and down stairs carrying a side satchel in 19 degrees Celsius weather. They all start sweating by the end. So load carrying alone, walking for long distances alone is enough to explain why post a million years, we might see the loss of hair and the increase in sweat glands. If it's just a question of intensity, that running is intense enough to be a strong selection pressure, both load and terrain easily apply. Though I will argue today and have argued in the past that we're so good at carrying loads up and down hills, the cost, energetic cost remains pretty low today with the bodies that we have right now. So here we have on the x-axis gradient. On the y-axis, we have cost per unit time, so the cost of locomotion. These three lines are walking at different speeds. So we have slow walking, medium walking, and fast walking. The solid lines are walking with no load, and the dotted line are walking with a load. We don't actually incur a substantial cost when walking with loads. In comparison, if you remember back when I showed you the curves for the ponies and the curves for the humans, when ponies carry loads, donkeys carry loads, the increase in their metabolic cost is proportional to the percent of the load of their body mass. 18% load, 18% increase in metabolic cost. When humans carry loads, not the same, 16% load, 12% increased cost. Some people even say 5% increased cost depending on the person and the training. So even though we have this massive 50% jump for running, we actually are better load carriers than ponies, which, as you can imagine, is why in a lot of cultures, it's the humans that carry the loads, not the ponies, okay? So load carrying and incline walking can explain numerous aspects of our bodies, why we have long lower limbs, why we have medial-laterally wide pelvises, why we have stiff and light feet, why we use sweating, thermoregulation, and why we have happy feelings after long bouts. I do think it's important that our evolutionary past should frame our research designs today. I think it is important that we continue to investigate the importance of wearables in understanding how people walk, when they walk, and how they change their gait. We evolved in and around trees. Primates, 65 million years of evolution in trees. Our own lineage, at least 1 million years of walking between patchy resources surrounded by trees. Initial data show that humans change their gait, their speed, their conversation, their breathing, and their energetic cost when walking through groves of trees. Our evolutionary past matters for our biomechanics, for our gait. We walk outside, we walk with other people, and we carry different kinds of loads. I have shown that people change their gait when they're walking with friends versus when they're walking with lovers, when they're walking with kids versus when they're walking with groceries. So looking at these relationships and why it might be different carrying your kid than carrying some water, this will help us understand a little bit better why human energetic cost changes with what they're actually carrying. And then I will take my final moment to say, there would be no human evolution if it wasn't for women's reproduction. And designing women out of our studies, trying to ignore what happens at puberty, thinking that it's too tricky to figure out their bodies, is hurting how we understand evolution. If there's anything I learned at the Olympics this year, it's that mothers win medals and break records. And I think we need to be cognizant of that when we design our studies in the future. Thank you.
Awesome, yay.
Yeah, a silent round of applause.
Yes, totally.
I can leave this up in case people want to ask questions about a particular slide, or I can just bring it back if you all want to see a graph or something. So just let me know.
Okay. I'll be moderating some of these questions. They are coming in via chat. I think that's probably the best way to do this. So I'll just work my way through here. We have a question that says, thanks for an interesting talk. I think you said modern humans can walk carrying loads of 15% body weight to the same cost as Australopithecines, pass that test, with no load. If I heard that correctly, how is the cost in Australopithecines known as they are extinct?
Oh, genius. Yeah. That study was the Wang and Crompton study used biomechanical model with limb proportions. Australopithecines, it's a tricky question. Lucy is definitely outside of adult human size range, though other Australopithecines fall on just the small end of human variation. And so it would be extrapolating data on very small humans with data on essentially the emergence of our body proportions and our stature and mass really later. And that was how Wang and Crompton went about that particular analysis. It is really difficult to extrapolate to Lucy unless you use children, and then you have to deal with their metabolic differences.
Another question from chat. Any insights on other quadrupeds carrying loads? Does cost of transport increase the same for, say, elephants compared to donkeys? How about giraffes?
Let's see. It was actually, people don't study load carrying in quadrupeds enough. I have seen a really nice paper on the optimal transport curve in elephants, but they were not loaded in that paper. I have not seen cost of transport in giraffes, though that would be super fun to do. The funding for the horse and donkey, or the pony and donkey papers, comes because people who are using ponies and donkeys for brick labor were trying to figure out how to save the health of their animals. So they were able to gather funding in order to study what load carrying is really doing to the animals. I think you would have to sort of make an argument that elephants who are load carrying to help out their community need to be studied and protected as well. I haven't seen anybody look at that though.
Okay. Another question, are there any other factors that are still being questions, are still big questions in the field, but which it is difficult to find evidence for or against, similar to your comments on our inability to study when hominids started losing hair?
Well, language would be another one. I mean, I'm not sure exactly if you're thinking of gait specifically or thermoregulation specifically, but language is one where people speculate a number of different ways. I was going to talk a little bit about whether or not we evolved to dance, because there's definitely an argument in the literature that in order to maintain social cohesion, we need to do a number of things. I mentioned that walking together does promote social cohesion. I don't know if you need something more special than walking together, but there are definitely some researchers who say singing and dancing release such a big amount of endorphins, really similar to sort of baboons grooming each other, that we probably needed some amount of singing and dancing really quickly in our evolution to maintain social cohesion. But again, that would just be something that we were speculating. Exact things about like the phenotype that you see, skin color, hair color, curliness, things like that, we're getting pretty much only from genetics, not from the fossil record.
Okay. Does the thermoregulation aspect explain the presence of hair on our heads despite the loss of hair everywhere else? Are there large ilia? a consequence of bipedalism?
Okay, so there definitely is a thermoregulatory argument for curly hair. And that's because curly hair creates a little layer of cool air right around the brain, suggesting that by having a little halo of curly hair, you're protecting the brain from overheating. There doesn't seem to be any real thermoregulatory usefulness for straight hair. The idea for straight hair is just that if you move into a high latitude, you need so much UV that you're just going to sort of get rid of anything that you can in order to grab vitamin D when you get it. So the straight hair is a consequence of trying to free up the UV to hit your scalp. So that would be the hair on the head. People pop up with things about eyebrows about once every 5 years or so. It's definitely something fun for you all to look at. The idea that eyebrows protect the eye from sweating doesn't seem to hold true very well. Those of you who have run in hot weather or anything in hot weather, carried a backpack, know that the sweat runs into your eyes pretty quickly. So eyebrows, so then you're kind of stuck with evolutionary psych land. I don't know how many of you like living in that land, which is just that you need eyebrows in order to communicate nonverbal. And so we're kind of stuck with eyebrows as a nonverbal communication. Ryan and I both have dogs, and our dogs definitely use eyebrows as ways of communicate. So I might buy it, but it's definitely a tricky one.
Gauging on the profile pictures, it looks like there might be a dog in the audience that's very interested in your talk. Another question, with the research you've done, how do you think human bodies will change in another 1,000,000 years of evolution?
I really like this question. I have thought a lot about this. So in sort of realistic land, I do think that there's going to be more integration of technology in our bodies. So you can go down that rabbit hole as much as you like. I think transhumanism is a super fun area to sort of spend some time thinking about from time to time. In terms of the rest of our body, I think it is a little bit more tricky, because I think that reproductive loads are not really going to change that much. And unless you just decide to have babies grown outside of a uterus in the next blah, 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 100,000 years or something. As long as children are grown in a uterus, then the thermoregulation you need in order to manage that, the sort of locomotor apparata you need in order to walk with a large anterior load, all of these pieces, I think, are going to continue to be pretty important. I'm trying to think of what else. I mean, my favorite part of WALL-E is at the end when they show the people with like no bone density after living in space for so long. I think that that's genius. And I guess it's true. If we left gravity and decided to evolve in a gravity-less environment, then I guess all bets are off, and we're definitely going to see changes in our bone structure. And then of course the business with our teeth, which is partly evolutionary, partly cultural. We're going to continue. I mean, this is sort of non-locomotor, but I mean, just for fun, if we're talking about evolution, we're rapidly getting smaller teeth. We're losing teeth. Everyone, is getting a mismatch between the dental genes and the mandibular structure. And so what happens with our faces, I think, is probably going to be pretty interesting.
Looking forward to seeing that. As a long distance backpacker, when I'm able to carve out the time, this is Karen Troy, I feel firsthand that reducing my pack weight makes a big difference in the amount of effort it takes to hike in steep terrain. How does this square with the very modest metabolic cost increases that you show here? Is it just that we are very sensitive to small changes in effort?
We are so, wow, that is a perfect way of saying it. We are super sensitive to small changes in effort, particularly ones that are going to change thermoregulation. We use behavioral modifications before we are going to dip into physiological modifications. I will say that it does seem to vary a little bit on how the load is distributed, especially if you want to maintain speed. I guess it would depend a little bit on how your pack was organized, but it's true that if you kind of spread the weight around a little bit, we can maintain the speed at sort of a higher pack load. So that might be one thing to consider, but it is also true that with most loads, people are going to slow down rather than incur an energetic cost. So it depends a little bit on the terrain, the temperature, the situation, how the load is distributed. The 16% increase in load with a 12% increase in cost, that's been shown for head loads and frontal loads, back loads. We tend to accept a slight energetic penalty for a back load because we can walk so much faster. But you can also just try distributing around your center of mass, and then we can carry loads pretty much forever.
Looking back at early human behavior, what's like the range of weights carried, and is that different for different regions of the world?
Yeah. So in the fossil record, we have evidence of loads at around 20 kilos. That would just be archaeology. Most non-contraceptive using indigenous populations carry their children up to age 4. So that can be also 20 kilos. And so if and then many human populations carry, as I showed you, I showed you pictures that are not unusual, that you can just basically do any sort of Google image search of people carrying loads, and all over the world, you'll see a kid, a satchel, and water. And so you're upward. I'm not doing a kilogram assessment in my head particularly well, but you're gonna get to 50 pounds super fast, even in people who are only 120 pounds. And so they're carrying this, 50% of their body weight distributed around their body, and that's normal. But then walking speeds usually slow to about 1 meter per second.
Okay, yeah. Another question from the chat. If you had to, how would you go about measuring metabolic cost in a giraffe or an elephant? Would they need a very large custom mask?
No, you would just use a room. I guess you would use like a gymnasium or something like that, and just have, now, of course, with COVID, we're so good at measuring oxygen flow. Don't think I haven't thought about this. And now that we know exactly the air removal rate of all of these large spaces, it's just prime for measuring large aerobic respiration in creatures. So now is a good time to think about getting permission to walk giraffes on a treadmill. Yeah, for sure. And just remember, you do want the animals to be happy, right? When you look at Taylor's original paper, some of those animals were not happy. And you can tell from their energetic costs that they're high. And so to see some of these interesting patterns, we want the animals to feel safe. So measuring their energetic expenditure in a place that they're familiar with, because we have such a great ability to measure airflow now, I think if you're going to go down that path, then that'll definitely be something to consider.
Thank you. Okay, are certain body types better suited to load carriage than others?
Well, yes. Humans who have relatively wide, mediolaterally wide pelvises in proportion to their stature or their mass or their lower limb length, however you measure that sort of size, people who have relatively wide pelvises and associated with measures of size are better load carriers than others. And that means that they carry the load regardless of location for a smaller increase in metabolic cost. So women are better load carriers on average. On average, we have a polymorphic species, which is what makes us so awesome and fun. But on average, women are better load carriers than men. But in the future, speaking of the future, men can, carry lots of loads too, and their pelvis can start widening and they'll be fantastic load carriers as well.
Looking ahead, still, we have a question here. It says, will climate change accelerate the selective pressure for good thermoregulation? What would it look like to improve our thermoregulation?
Another really good question. So first of all, climate change is, of course, affecting people who are generally impoverished, fewer access to resources on average, and probably not using contraception just because of the way that we spread resources. So yes, climate change will absolutely impact our evolution because people are freely reproducing in those environments and people who can thermoregulate better with some of these changes. I think that there's as much of an energetic burden on gaining access as thermoregulation, but the lack of access to clean water, in addition to increased in seasonality, and as well as just heat, all of these things are going to be significant selection pressures. Now, that being said, humans are pretty good thermoregulators, right? We have a pretty high surface area to volume ratio. If you want to be better, you need to be smaller. Smaller creatures, smaller humans have a larger surface area to volume ratio than larger humans. So on average, we would expect people to become smaller. Different humans use their sweating as a thermoregulatory resource at different parts of their lives. So children usually start sweating a little bit later than we might expect. People with more muscle have more water. And so increased muscle, increased water means you're going to sweat. You're going to use sweating as a means of thermoregulation at a higher rate. You just have to be able to replace that water with clean water. In the absence of clean water, getting smaller and increasing blood perfusion would be really good ways to get rid of heat very quickly. Some humans are already extremely good at thermoregulation. A quick way of doing that is accepting a slightly larger load of nitric oxide in your blood. A vasodilator, if you have slightly larger nitric oxide and you don't receive any negative side effects from that, this exists in some human populations because of how they manage antioxidants, then you'll be a better blood perfusion. You won't lose water from sweating, and you'll end up being pretty good at thermoregulation.
All right, thank you so much. That was really a great talk. Thanks so much for joining us in our virtual ASB. Hopefully we can see you in person next year. That would be great. I really appreciate it a lot. And I'm going to go ahead and direct everybody now to Spatial Chat, where we have a room set aside to reconnect with Dr. Wall-Scheffler. It's the Mary room. It's S2 in the Spatial Chat list. And we're also going to have a virtual opening reception there. And so, yeah, please head over to Spatial Chat. Please, if you don't do it here, thank you, Cara, for your talk. That was amazing. And we'll catch up with all of you later. Thanks so much.